Imagine for a second arriving in an entirely new world. You step off a ship and this vast, uncertain wilderness just stretches out right in front of you. Dense forests, completely strange animals, and a future that is, well, one massive question mark. But there's also a ton of hope in the air. You and your family are about to build a brand new life, a new settlement. But then, within just a few years, you and literally everyone you know completely disappear, without a single trace. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, just a chillingly blank slate. Welcome to Disexplainer on what is, without a doubt, one of America's greatest unsolved puzzles, the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke. You know, what makes this historical cold case so absolutely shocking is the sheer scale of it all. We are talking about over 100 men, women, and children vanishing into thin air. This wasn't just a tiny scouting party getting lost in the woods. No, this was an entire bustling community that seemingly evaporated. They left behind a 400-year-old mystery that historians and archaeologists have been completely obsessed with solving ever since. All right, let's dive right into part one, the dream of Roanoke. The year is 1587, marking a new beginning in the New World. To really grasp this disappearance, we've got to understand the massive ambition behind the trip itself. England was watching Spain dominate the Americas, making an absolute fortune, and naturally, they wanted a piece of the action. So, driven by Sir Walter Raleigh, the English set their sights on North America. Now, here is the crucial difference. Earlier colonization attempts completely flopped because they were mostly just small groups of soldiers. But this 1587 expedition, they brought whole families. Over 100 colonists landed on Roanoke Island in present-day North Carolina, led by Governor John White. They weren't just there to poke around. They were planting crops, they were building homes, they fully intended to stay forever. And honestly, nothing symbolizes that long-term commitment quite like this next milestone. Just shortly after they arrived, Governor White's own daughter, Eleanor, gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare. She was the very first English child born in the New World. For these colonists, little Virginia was a real beacon of hope. She represented a permanent future, a tangible sign that, hey, maybe this incredibly risky endeavor was actually going to work out. Moving on to part two, isolation and the Armada. This brings us to the desperate need for supplies. Okay, so the timing of this expedition basically doomed the settlement from the start. Life on Roanoke was incredibly harsh. Food was constantly running out, and relations with some of the local tribes were, let's say, pretty tense. So the colonists make a major call. Governor White is going to sail back to England to grab much-needed supplies and reinforcements. He figured he'd be gone for, what, a few months tops? Well, England suddenly got plunged into a massive war with Spain. The famous Spanish Armada was threatening English shores, which meant absolutely every single ship was drafted for defense. White's return was delayed, not by a few weeks, but by years. For 3 agonizing years, those Roanoke colonists were totally isolated in the wilderness, waiting on a rescue ship that simply couldn't come. Which brings us to Section 3, the empty settlement, and a truly chilling discovery. By the time White finally secured passage back to Roanoke in 1590, you can imagine how ecstatic he was to see his family again. But as his ship approached the island, that excitement morphed into a creeping dread. It was way too quiet. No smoke rising from the chimneys, not a single sign of life. What White and his crew found was, essentially, a giant crime scene that made zero sense. The settlement wasn't just abandoned, it was meticulously cleared out. The houses, gone, carefully taken apart. And even more bizarre, there were no bodies, no graves whatsoever. And absolutely zero evidence of a battle or any violence. So the big takeaway here is this. The evidence did not point to a panicked escape or a massacre. It pointed to a planned, orderly departure. But to where? As White desperately scoured the area looking for any hint of his family, he stumbled upon the one single clue that has kept historians up at night ever since. Carved deep into a wooden post was just one word, CROATOAN. And nearby, just the letters C-R-O carved into a tree. That's it. No further explanation, no hidden letter tucked under a rock, just that one imposing word, CROATOAN. Now, I know pop culture loves to treat this word as some spooky, supernatural curse, but it actually had a very real, incredibly practical meaning. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island inhabited by a Native American tribe. And this is a super important detail. Before White left for England 3 years earlier, they had a backup plan. If they had to relocate, they agreed to carve their destination into a tree or post. So this wasn't a cryptic mystery to White. It was a literal signpost. He knew exactly where he needed to go. He desperately wanted to sail to CROATOAN Island, but fate stepped in yet again. A massive, violent storm rolled in, and the ship's captain flat out refused to risk his vessel. He forced the entire expedition to turn back to England. John White never saw the colonists again. He died never knowing what actually happened to them. Let's shift to Section 4, Theories of the Lost. What actually happened to these settlers?
I just want you to pause for a second and really think about this. Where did they go? How do over 100 people, we're talking families, toddlers, elderly folks, just pack up an entire town and vanish into a 16th century wilderness without leaving a trail?
Well, over the last 4 centuries, countless researchers have obsessed over these clues, and it generally boils down to 4 main theories: assimilation, annihilation by attack, devastation by disease, or famine and scattering inland. So let's break these down against the cold, hard facts. Let's start with the attack theory. For a long time, this was just the default assumption. I mean, if they were overwhelmed by a hostile force, you'd expect to see mass graves, burned down buildings, and really clear signs of a violent struggle, right? But, as we just covered, the physical evidence is the exact opposite. 0 human remains, structures carefully taken apart. Look, people fleeing for their lives from an ambush simply do not take the time to neatly dismantle their houses. Because of this massive disconnect between expectation and evidence, most historians today highly doubt a sudden massacre took place. And that leads us to the most popular and arguably the most logical explanation, the assimilation theory. The settlers were freezing, starving, and totally cut off from England. They likely realized they just couldn't survive another winter on their own. Meanwhile, the local Native American tribes had the exact knowledge the colonists lacked: where to hunt, how to fish, and how to actually grow crops in that specific coastal soil. Merging with these tribes wasn't just an option, it was probably their only chance at survival. And there are actually some really fascinating historical clues that back this up. Decades later, English explorers in that same region reported hearing stories of Native American communities with highly unusual features, specifically lighter skin and gray or blue eyes. On top of that, several indigenous oral traditions talk about ancestors who interacted with early English settlers long before any other permanent colonies were set up. Now sure, memories can shift over time, but generations of these oral traditions strongly point to the idea that the colonists integrated, shared their tools, and just adapted to the local way of life. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Modern Clues and Discoveries, How Modern Archaeology is Unearthing New Evidence. So in recent years, researchers decided to take a fresh look at Governor John White's original hand-drawn map of the region, and they noticed something super weird: these tiny little paper patches. Now, patching mistakes was pretty common back then, but using modern imaging technology, they looked underneath those patches and found a hidden, secret symbol. It looks like it marked the location of a possible inland fort, miles away from the island. Was this a backup settlement White had secretly planned? This mind-blowing find was a real game changer. It prompted researchers to launch brand new, targeted archaeological digs at this specific inland site. And guys, what they found was stunning. Far away from the original Roanoke Island, excavators started pulling up European artifacts dating precisely to the late 1500s. We are talking English metal tools found right smack in the middle of indigenous settlement areas. European pottery fragments mixed perfectly in with local Native American items. This physical proof strongly suggests that the colonists didn't just sit on the island waiting to die. They proactively packed up, relocated inland, and lived closely alongside local tribes. When you take all of this evidence and put it together like a giant puzzle, you get what many experts consider the most likely reality: the combined theory. The loss of Roanoke wasn't some dramatic, overnight vanishing act like in the movies. Actually, it's more like the colony just slowly dissolved. As food ran out and the years ticked by without any help, they adapted. They carefully took down their homes. Some probably moved to CROATOAN Island, just like the carving said. Others traveled inland to that secret fort location. Many simply merged with friendly tribes. It was a slow, tragic, but deeply resilient struggle, where the community fractured into smaller groups and just scattered to survive. But of course, the deeply human element of this mystery is exactly why we're still talking about it today. What was the ultimate fate of little Virginia Dare, the very first English child born in America? Did she survive that incredibly harsh transition? Did she grow up, learn the languages, and carry on a merged legacy that was just hidden from history? Or did her story end tragically out there in that unforgiving wilderness? While modern archaeology has given us some absolutely incredible new clues, some secrets of Roanoke are still out there, waiting in the dirt. So, what do you think happened to her?